This is ODAT Chat, your instant connection to recovery and community, one day at a time. This podcast may contain strong language, sexual content, and spiritual truth. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey friend, welcome to another episode of the ODAT Chat podcast. If you're new here, my name is Arlena and I'll be your host. And if you're a longtime listener, welcome back. So this is a podcast where my guests and I talk about how to recover from alcoholism and addiction. I'm looking to uncover the causes and conditions, the lessons learned along the way, and the tools and practices which lead to long-term recovery. You can find out more about this episode and past guests on the ODAT Chat website. Just visit odatchat.com, and ODAT is spelled O-D-A-A-T. So today my guest is John M. He is the podcast host of Sober Speak. We have a wide-ranging conversation starting with his family of origin, where his alcoholism started to develop, and how he got sober nearly 30 years ago. But before I jump into the podcast today, I'd like to share another valuable resource for you. I host an online classroom focusing on topics like how to improve self-esteem, how to end a toxic relationship, and more. You can find it at soberlifeschool.com. So back to the episode with John, who shares about his family members that he's lost to alcoholism, the voice that sounds like God, and how he started podcasting. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode with John. Well, John, thank you so much for joining me on the ODAT Chat podcast.
I'm an ODAT Chat fan, Miss Arlena. Yeah, it's a good podcast.
That's always fun.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and you're a podcast host as well. So we'll trade interviews. I want to share your podcast with my listeners as well, because I feel like, you know, we'll get the message out to everyone, and it just keeps it more interesting the more people we can share our recovery stories with, don't you think?
I do. The more exposure we can get, the better, and to get the message out. And I've told my audience many times over that the people who come in and share their stories, I'm so grateful for them. You know, they're vulnerable. Yeah. They lay their hearts out there, and I just want them to be heard by as many people as possible.
No, that's I appreciate your sentiment. I mean, it is, people come on and it can be kind of scary sometimes if they're not if they're not professional speakers, and it is it's a brave thing to do. So I'm with you. I certainly appreciate anybody who's willing to come on and share their story, and in hopes that they might help others. So
yeah, and in fact, just kind of a little side note, a story here that the reason I started my podcast is because my wife and I were at a holiday party, Christmas party, whatever you call it nowadays, for our AA group here in Texas a year ago in December. And there is a gentleman there. His name is Alex. And Alex always sits in the back of the room, and he is he's a Muslim guy, and he introduced, and he's from Iran, and he hardly ever says a word. When people call on him, he passes, or if he shares, it's very he doesn't share a lot. And so me and my wife cornered him at the party when we were at that holiday party. And we said, Alex, just tell me a little bit about yourself. He's such a nice guy. And he started going through this entire story about how he was in Iran during the hostage crisis, and Jimmy Carter, wow. And his dad had to kind of bribe or set up this big ruse to get them out of the country, and he finally got them out of the country. And once he got them there, they got to Germany, and they didn't know what to do from there. Then they went over to LA, and he got involved with some Persian version meetings over there, and he told me about how they didn't have Alcoholics Anonymous in Iran because alcohol is, quote, illegal, but they have in it. which is so weird, And so anyway, he went through this entire story, and I was like, me and my wife were on the way home, and we thought this should be like a movie. And I thought, how can I get Alex's people like Alex? How can we get his story out there in the world for people to hear? And I thought podcast. That kind of went through my head one night. I go, podcast. I know nothing about podcasts, and I couldn't shake it. And so I asked my wife the next morning. I go, if I wanted to put up like a website or something for people in our group so they could hear Alex's story and get him in here and record it, would you be able to help me? And God bless her, she did. And and I just kept recording, and I couldn't stop recording. And I thought, well, this is kind of neat, Yeah. And so that's where it all started. And so anyway, just side note.
It started with Alex. No, that's amazing. I love hearing how, these podcasts develop. It seems like everybody has a different reason for starting one, but at the core, it's because we're trying to, share the hope that recovery brings, so, that is very cool. So Alex has been on your podcast then, huh?
Yeah, he wasn't the first one, but he was the second. So in fact, we call it Alex Z, the Persian version. And so awesome. The first one was a guy we called him Mumbai Mike. He was actually visiting our group, and he spoke in a meeting, and he did really well. And he was visiting. He was from Mumbai, and I said, "Hey, Mumbai Mike, will you come over to my house? I've got this little project, and I need to test something out." And I fired up a Blue Yeti mic. Most people won't even know what that is, but
yeah, I did.
I fired up a Blue Yeti mic, and I said, "Hey, let's sit here and record." And he rambled on for about an hour, and then I published it. And I was like, "Oh wow, look, there's some people listening to this." I couldn't even believe it, And
yeah.
So that's how it started.
Oh, that's great. I love that. It's so funny how we give people nicknames in the rooms, isn't it?
Right. Some of them, like I can't even say them anymore. But some of them were politically incorrect from when I first got sober, but everybody was fine with it back then. And so, but I just don't even want to put it out on the airwaves now.
Yeah, but listen, you've been sober a long time. So your sobriety date is May 29th of 89.
1989. That is that's
a long time, guys.
By the grace, and I know you hear by the grace of God a lot, but I, from the bottom of my heart, I truly do mean it. Every once in a while, I'm just I'm sitting around doing nothing, and I think about the fact that I've been sober for a few days, and it just hits me, and I go, "Oh my goodness, how did I make it?" It's truly by the grace of God.
No, I totally, we do hear that a lot, but it never loses its meaning for me because I understand, I remember what it was like to, not be able to stay stopped. So, I totally get that. But, tell me, I always like to talk about people's past because I feel like, the way a person was raised and sometimes things that happen in our childhoods, sometimes there's trauma there. It's sometimes not. But, if there's trauma there, that does sort of lead to dysfunction. And I think a lot of us end up using drugs and alcohol as a coping skill. So let's start with a little bit about your family of origin. Can you tell me a little bit about what your dad did for a living and where y'all grew up?
Sure. My mom and dad, they met in Scotland, which is where my mom was from. He was in the Air Force. I was an Air Force brat for the first 6 years of my life. And my mom had probably, I think, 8th grade education, if I'm not mistaken. And they moved over here to the United States. And then I was born. I was actually born in Bangor, Maine. Don't know much about. I've been back as a couple of times on business as an adult. But I don't know much about it. But so that's where I was born. And for the first 6 years of my life, like I said, I was an Air Force brat. And then my parents split when I was 6 or 7. I don't really remember much about that split. I just knew Dad was gone one day. He would come back and get me. We would take trips back to Tennessee, where he was from. One time he actually ended up just coming to pick me up kind of for a vacation, and he ended up getting remarried to another lady who would be my stepmom for 30 plus years. And but from that point, though, from 6 on, it was basically, I mean, even before that, because my dad was traveling a lot in the Air Force, it was really just me and my mom. And that I was an only child, and so something happened, though, around, I started to notice things around 10, 11, 12. I would go out into the kitchen, and my mom would be checking the stove, and she would, her head would be nodding, and she'd be going things like, off, off,
Mm-hmm.
off. And she would do that literally 50, 60 times. And she would do that with the front door. And nobody talked about mental illness back then, but it turned out to be, she had a pretty, I don't know if there are less severe cases of it, but she had a obsessive compulsive disorder. And, now people call me OCD because of how I act and how I can be, and, my persistence and all that sort of stuff. But she truly was OCD, but to me, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew it was weird. It was embarrassing. And then around 12, 13, 14, she had always been very, very thin and talked a lot about weight. But this is when it really started to get out of hand. She became anorexic, bulimic. She would get down into the 80s and 70s on a consistent basis.
Oh my God.
And she would go out to the pool, and she thought she looked great, and everybody else could see her bones sticking out. And it was really a scary sight. And, I remember on a real consistent basis sitting around the dinner table, her talking about suicide. And she also had these kind of, she had these kind of weird sort of illnesses, if you will. It was like an asthmatic sort of illness, to where she would go to doctor after doctor, and they'd say, you're just fine, there's nothing wrong with you. But she would have these kind of breathing episodes like once a day at the exact same time, and she would close all the windows, and it would make it dark. And we were in, a 1-bedroom apartment. And so and now I'm not blaming my mom. She was doing the best she could with what she had. And nobody, like I said, nobody really talked about mental illness back then. It was just kind of very strange. And so anyway, that's the kind of environment I was growing up in, if you will. And so that was the perfect storm, if you will, for somebody like me. And the other part that was kind of challenging about that is because I was her only sense of sanity, if you will, in her life. And she held on to me. She did not want me leaving the house, the apartment. And all I wanted to do, as you can imagine, was be out. So that turned into a lot of friction, a lot of shoving matches. I wanted to go out with my friends. She wanted me to stay home. And so we were doing the best we could with what we had. And so alcohol was not really introduced to me until I was like about 17 years old. And that's when I found alcohol at a party. I got lit. It was a release for me. I mean, just a release. I remember that party. In fact, I didn't have a car. I didn't have my license, and I wanted to drive everybody home. I don't know what it is about alcoholics and cars, but here I am. I just wanted to get in a car, start driving people around. And so that's kind of when it started for me. And I had always been kind of, I wouldn't call it unpopular, and I wouldn't call it shy, but I was always kind of in the background. But for me, Arlena, at that point, that's when I really took off in terms of being very popular at my school. I could fit in with any group. We went out dancing and partying and doing all those things that you do a lot. And like I said, I just became very popular. So that was kind of my background growing up. And
So in high school, did you? It sounded like you were, kind of quiet when you were younger, but when you turned 17 and started drinking, that's when you started like having a lot of friends and getting out of the house more and doing all that.
Yeah, I was very popular. In fact, I was, like they have the homecoming queen. Well, I was the Valentine King. I mean, so, and any sort of and this is just kind of give you a flavor of what I was like in high school, and anything that I ran for, like student council or anything like that, I was I was the wittiest. I got voted that. And yeah, so I became very popular, and that was my, people talk about having a horrible time in high school. Well, for me, it was like, it was a release. It was a place to go. It was a way to get out. And so it turned out to be a very good time for me.
And you didn't have any consequences from those first experiences in high school?
With alcohol? No, I wasn't, and it's interesting. I guess it wasn't as high on the radar for people back then when I was starting out. There were consequences such as hangovers. I did, and this was in college, I did just spend one night in jail. I got a public intoxication. And, I mean, only an alcoholic would say that, right? Well, I only spent one night in jail.
Only one night, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember waking up, like a friend of mine got a DWI, and I was in the car, and I didn't have my shirt on, and I was like, raising all kinds of hell. And they said, "We're not letting this guy drive home." So they took me down, locked me up. I do remember waking up in that cell, and I was just. I was mad, and I was banging on the jail bars, and I asked the guy next to me what he was in for, and he said he was there for assault and battery, and he was scared of me, and and you can't see me in full, but I'm a short guy. I don't have a lot of muscle or anything like that, and but my anger was kind of backing him away, and I remember the guy that went down to jail also with me for his DWI. He goes, "Did you hear that guy upstairs last night?" And I go, "Don, that was me." So
making a lot of ruckus.
Yes, I was.
That's funny. And so it kind of sounds like you were leading a little bit of a double life, because at home things with mom were kind of I don't know, it sounds like it was really challenging, and then you had this other life outside of the home where you could just kind of be yourself and have a good time.
Yep, that's a very good way to put it. It was a double life. It seemed like I was doing okay on the outside, but the life at home was anything but what I wanted to. And we would move around all the time. In other words, mom she would take geographic cures, not from alcoholism, but from her mental illness. And we would move to California. We would move to St. Louis. We would move to San Antonio. We were always moving. In fact, to this day, I still keep boxes in. I have a career. I'm in enterprise technology sales. I've been in this same house for probably 12 to 15 years now. I should say about 11 years. Me and my wife have been married now for 16, 17 years. We have a couple of kids, and I still think about being ready to move on at the drop of a hat. It doesn't disappear.
Oh, that's interesting. Just having that need to be ready to go at any moment.
That's right.
What did your mom do to support herself that whole time?
She was it's interesting. She'd be a receptionist or a key punch operator, I think is what they were called back then. She would get kind of low-level type of jobs, but she was always showing up for work. The thing that she did was, she liked money, and she liked being thin. There was like some sort of queen or something at some point that says you can never be too rich or too thin, and she took that to heart. So she was always able to support me. And
did your father contribute?
yeah, I remember that $90 check that came in every month. So he took care of his part financially. He was not a deadbeat dad, as they would say, but he was living in it. He went off and he started another family. And I would see them sometimes. I would go up to the Tennessee, Kentucky area and visit with them sometimes during the summer. But he had a new wife, and he had a son who would be my half brother. An interesting note: that half brother ended up at 27 years of old. He didn't necessarily take his life, but he took his life. In other words, he drank so much alcohol and drugs that all his major organs shut down. And
27?
Yeah, 27 years old, which is the age that I actually ended up getting sober myself. And they used to look at him and they'd say, my family calls me Johnny, and they'd say, "Why can't you be more like Johnny?" And that would just infuriate him, as you can well imagine. When you're in the cups of your illness, you don't want to hear anything like that. And then my stepmother, she ended up dying of basically she got addicted to opioids and
pills.
Right, the pills. She'd have back surgeries and such, and my dad is still alive today. In fact, we still have a good relationship today. We have a very good relationship today. He got married again, and he has a wife, and so we have a good relationship.
Oh, that's good. But geez, that must have been hard though. Being with your mom, just the two of you, and then going over to your dad's house. And did he ever try to take custody of you, or
no, he never did.
Did you want to live with him?
No, I never did. It's interesting. People have asked me about that before, and I've thought about it. And I don't want to go into his story too much, but I will tell you this: is that he has him and that family unit up there and where they live have their own set of challenges. And when you look back on it, I used to think about, why was I left all alone with this? But now, during sobriety, first of all, I can talk to a lot of people who are in some dire type of situations and say, "Hey, I know what it's like. I've been there."
Yeah.
But I also see God's hand in all of this throughout that time. So let me go ahead, and as long as we're talking about my mom, just kind of fast forward there a little bit. Yes.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of years in there, but I ended up getting sober in 1989, as I've mentioned, and I had not seen my mom in probably 3 years at this point. She had really gone off the deep end, and I had heard a lot of my friends talk about her. Like, in other words, she became basically kind of like I guess what you would call a bag lady. But she had an apartment that she lived in, and she would work, but she would walk around the streets, and my friends would see her. She shaved her hair with a number 2 razor. She would dye her hair jet black. She would wear all black, and she would carry her black purse, and basically she would walk around the streets, and she would go into the stores. I know that she got kicked out of stores and such like that just for kind of talking to people too much in there and those sorts of things. So, and my friends would see her, so I knew that she was around. And by the way, I want to let you know, I've told this story many times. Sometimes, like I told this recently. I'll just say this. I'm kind of matter of fact about it in the way I'm telling you right now, but there are times to where I'm telling this before a group, like at my home group or something like this, and I just kind of, I break down, I remember. So it would be naive for me to think that my past has not affected me, because it has. But sobriety offers a new way to look at that experience. But nonetheless, so she would walk the streets, and I went to my sponsor. By the way, I was in and out of AA from 86 to 89. Tried it.
Okay.
Just, I couldn't get it. I thought, like a lot of people do, I was one of those people who was constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself. And finally, this last sponsor I had, he took me aside and he said, hey, have you ever worked the steps? And I'm like, I could have had a V8, I never thought of that, and it's Bob. Yeah. And Bob is still my sponsor today. I tell him I'm test driving him. He's a temporary sponsor, but I'll give him a chance.
Nice.
And so, I talked to Bob after I've been sober, and we got working on the steps, and we got working on them quick. And after about 3 months or so, I knew I was in a new spot and things were looking up for me, and I could tell something was changing and something was working in my life. And I said, hey, Bob, I want to go find my mom and make amends to her. And he said, really, the only thing I remember from our conversation is, you just keep your side of the street clean. Mm-hmm. So I knew where to find her. I went down there. I was walking down the streets and I found my mom, and I said, I saw her walking off in the distance, and I got out of my car and I ran over to her and I yelled at her from a distance, and I said, hey, Mom. And she turned around and she looked at me. And she didn't recognize me at first. It had been several years. And finally, she recognized who I was. And I said, hey, Mom, I just want to talk to you for a second. And she said, I hate you. Get out of my life. I never want to see you again. And she turned on her heels and she walked away.
Wow.
So I called my sponsor. And we had a discussion, and he saw me, and he was a little bit concerned that I was going to drink. And unfortunately, that didn't even cross my mind. But he just said to me, he said, listen, she's emotionally unavailable. Just let her be who she wants to be, and you kind of get on with your life. And that's what I did. Mm-hmm. So I went back to school, and I got my degree, and nobody in our family.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, how old were you when you had that conversation with your mom?
I would have been right when I first got sober, 27. I'm 57 now, so I mean, I could be a year or so off, but right in that area, right at 27.
Oh, okay. Wow, it must have been so hard.
Well, it was kind of numbing, to tell you the truth, at the time. I didn't really know what to do with that. And I didn't feel emotions about it really until years later. And really until I started talking about it a little more. I just kind of kept it quiet for a significant period of time. And I talked to my sponsor about it, and, it didn't really come up. I just knew that I was kind of alone in this world, and I needed, when I say alone, family of origin, in that way, I was basically alone, and I was I had my AA family, but as you know, it's not quite the same.
Well, yeah, and it sounded like you had some distance between your dad, even though it sounds like you had a good, a civil, decent relationship. It's like your mom was your primary person, and then for her to say something like that to you, I bet that, of course you felt alone.
Yeah.
It's brutal.
Sometimes, now just thinking about it after you said that kind of, brings up some emotions. And, when I really sit down and think about it, it was kind of it was a rough time. And once again, I always go back to this. It's nothing against my mom. She was doing the best what she had. So I went back to school. I got my degree. And this was like 2-3 years later now. Yes, so I worked for about a year, quit work, and then I went back to school. I got my degree. And nobody in our family had really ever graduated from college. And so this was kind of a big deal. Like I said, my mom had minimal education. We didn't even really talk about college when I was growing up. And so I was driving down the highway one day. It's called 635 or LBJ here in the Dallas, Texas area. And I had just gotten those graduation announcements. And all of a sudden, this little intuitive thought came to me, and it said, it's time to go find her again. And I thought, I don't want to do this, but I couldn't shake it. So I went back to that same area where I'd heard about her still walking in the streets. And I went into one of the stores over there, and I said, have you seen my mom? She looks like this. And they said, oh, we know your mom. And they said, it's interesting. We see her all the time, but we hadn't seen her in a couple of weeks. So we're not sure what's going on. And I called around to the various hospitals around the area. One of them I called into was at Parkland. It's where JFK was actually pronounced deceased. Some of your listeners know about that. And I asked about my mom, and they said, well, we can't confirm or deny just because of privacy reasons. And
sure.
Then they called me back in a couple of weeks, and they said, we can tell you that your mom is here. And I said, okay. I said, is it all right for me to come down and see her? They said, yes. She said, it's okay for you to come down and see her. So what I found out is that they had deemed her both a danger to herself and to society. And they had locked her up. And my understanding is they were doing kind of experiments on her, if you will. Like, in other words, they had hooked her up to some electric machines to her head, and they would measure her brain waves, and they would put her before various students and classes and ask her questions, study her, almost like a lab rat or whatever. And she not only had anorexia and OCD and bulimia, she had schizophrenia, I guess is what they called it. And then she would call them words that went through her head on a consistent basis. In other words, the word death would just ring out in her head, and she couldn't stop, and it'd go over and over and over again. So I came down there to the hospital. This is a day I'll never forget in my life. And if you've ever seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson, it looked just like that. There were people wandering around aimlessly. They let me in, and I saw my mom, and she was 78 pounds. And,
oh, my goodness.
We sat down at a table, and she told me about how she had thought about throwing herself out the window that we were looking at several times. And about halfway through our conversation there at that table, she stopped and she said, there's something different about you. And she had never said that to me before in my life. And she says,
she really saw you.
She saw something different. And she said, is it that God you talk about? And I said, I don't know, Mom. I would imagine it is. It's hard for me to tell you exactly what it is. But here's what I want to say to you, Mom. I said, I don't know what it was between me and you, Mom, for all those years, but whatever it was, it is not with me anymore. And I want you to be happy and joyous and free. And I don't know how you're going to get there, but maybe one day I can help you. And I remember leaving that day. And as those doors the big steel door was slamming behind me, and then the clank of the lock, I started walking out to my car, and I knew, Arlena, because of that a piece of me had floated away, and that because of that, I was never going to be the same guy again. So I ended up going back home. Didn't know where we were going to go from there. And she ended up getting out of the hospital like a month or so later. And they got her on some medicine. And we started having staggered visits. Like, I just knew I couldn't see her all the time. It was a little too much for me. And so I would visit her once a week and sometimes once every couple of weeks. And slowly and surely, we started kind of developing a relationship. She started to get better. She wasn't big by any means, but she was eating. She was at a healthy weight. The medicine did just an absolute miracle for her. Well, so here's the thing. Is it the medicine? Is it the God of her understanding? Is it a combination of both? But she started asking me about my God of my understanding. And she started to develop a God of her own understanding. And she said, she would tell me about these little prayers that she would have with God. And she called herself Twig, right? Much like. And she said, she'd start out the prayers and she'd say, "Dear God, this is Twig. Just wanted to let you know all is well today. Bye-bye, Twig." And that would be her prayers. She would have these things. And so that went on up until 2000, the year 2000. So this would be from, 1994 to about 2000 or so, or 1993, right in that area. And I remember I used to be able to, I used to go into a drugstore and I would look at the cards for Mother's Day, Arlena, and none of them, absolutely none of them would work. All I wanted was a blank card just to send to my mother. And then during this time, our relationship started to blossom and I started to tell her I loved her. She was telling me she loved me. We were seeing each other on a consistent basis, and every single one of those cards worked. I could send her all of them. It was a beautiful thing.
Really?
Same mother, same child. Something changed. And so if I fast forward now to the year 2000, I get a call from her one night. And she says she's having some stomach pains. And I go over there and I pick her up and I take her to the emergency room and they check her in and they put her in overnight and she can't get rid of these pains. And she was there for like 3 days. And on the third day I went back and I'm calling the doctor who was caring for her. And I'm saying, this is a tough lady. She didn't complain about pain. I said, something's not right and I can't put my finger on it. Can you please give her some more pain medicine? And we had a big conversation about it and he was saying no and I'll be up later. And I went back into the room and I said, "Mom, they're coming with pain medicine." And she held her hand out to me and she smiled and I held her hand. And I'd never seen anything like this before, but her little eyes rolled up into the back of her head. And I knew something really serious was going on. So I ran out to the nurse's desk. I said, "Something's going on with my mom." They came in there, they hit some button. It's called, what is it called? Code blue or blue code or something.
Sure.
And about 15 or so personnel from the hospital were in that room in no time. And I was sitting there watching them working on my mom and my wife, my lady who was my girlfriend, who is my wife now, Shannon. She called me and she had been looking into somebody to help out my mom. And she said, "I think I found somebody to help out your mom. I know they're not doing a good job at the hospital." And I'm sitting there kneeling down and I'm watching all this going on in front of me. And I said, "It's too late. I'm watching her right now and she's dying in front of me." And my girlfriend at the time was like, "You got to be kidding me." She ran down there and I hung up the phone. And then they came out and they told me that she had just passed.
Wow.
And I gave the eulogy for the ceremony. And I can tell you that I remember during those 4 or 5 days before we actually went in for the ceremony, I felt grief like I had never felt before. But one thing that I did not feel was regret. I'd said everything I needed to say, and we'd had all the words that we needed to have. And one of the things I remember most is cleaning out her apartment when all was done. And I found a shoebox with all those all those Mother's Day's cards that I had written her all those years during my sobriety. She had kept each and every one of them. And so I didn't really mean to go in my mom's story so much right there on the beginning to the end. I feel like all our time is gone almost, but I
No, it's so important. Listen, and as painful as your story is, it needs to be told, because I can't tell you how many times I've met people who've had similar stories. I mean, I know 3 people who come to mind in my own personal circle, and I'm just one little tiny spot in the world. And so, John, I think the story that you tell about your mom is a story of redemption, right? It's a story of hope that, even though that you endured so many painful times with your mom, that there was hope at the end. Even though she wasn't well, it's like you were the one who changed, and you, by you changing, that changed the dynamic of your relationship,
Yeah, it's interesting. You have what you call unintended consequences in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not why I came into AA. It had nothing to do with my mom.
Yeah.
I just wanted to stay away from the drink for one day at a time.
Sure.
But you just keep going through the process. Just keep working through the steps, and these kind of things happen. And I realize I've told this story before, and there have been people who came up to me and they said my story wasn't quite as clean. My parent ended up dying or something like that. And I realize that happens. And, I have other things in my life that I guess that probably aren't as clean, maybe my dad and such, but the idea is just to go through the process and to hold on to the steps and hold on to the people that are around me. I always say AA is like, it's been like we're all angels with only one wing, and the only way we can fly is to embrace each other.
Oh, I love that.
People like you and other people in Alcoholics Anonymous have been my one-winged angel throughout all these years.
Oh, I love that. I've never heard that before, but I get it. It couldn't be more true. I mean, we all definitely need each other to walk this path and to survive, some of the things that we have to feel. It's all the pain that we have to try to process and feel, but we do that together. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I was curious though, if we could step back a little bit, a couple of things. So one is, you mentioned, you get this, you mentioned it like a persistent thought or a voice a couple of times, like once when you had the idea to make amends to your mom, and then you mentioned earlier you had the idea to start the podcast. Do you feel that it's inspiration, or is that God talking to you? What do you feel like that is?
For me, right. And people, by the way, I just last week interviewed on my podcast an atheist in AA.
Sure.
And it was just absolutely fantastic. And so, he would explain this in a different way than I do. And I can't prove this, so to speak. But, in the part in the book where it says, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us.
Yeah.
Or it talks about having, what you call the sixth sense, where Jesus talks about being rocketed into the fourth dimension.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's what I think it is for me. It is a God consciousness. It also talks after we take the third step that we were reborn, And I know that word born has a little bit of negative connotation with some people, not only in AA, but just in general. But I believe that's the spirit coming up within me. I did, when I was in school, Arlena, I did my senior paper when I was in college. I did my senior paper on near-death experiences. And I absolutely, I'm fascinated with that. I don't know why.
I am too, yeah.
But
partly because it feels like alcoholism is
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And those people, what you would notice is when they saw the light and they came back, all of a sudden they were interested in reading and getting as much education and knowledge as they possibly could. They wanted to help other people. They saw life in a different way.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that happened to me. I didn't have the bright light experience like Bill Wilson did. Mine was been of the educational variety, but there was something in me that turned a corner, and why I was able to receive that and other people either resist it and or they don't receive that and they don't want to work the steps and they don't want to stay around. I don't know, but I just know that it was like God picking me up by the scruff of the neck and pulling me out of what was a dire situation. And it's so far, a day at a time, for quite some time, I've been able to live a new kind of life.
No, that's amazing. It's a complete psychic change. I totally get it. And I really love that you do have such a, you're a seeker of knowledge. You know, I am too. And you mentioned, just, pursuing that knowledge. Do you have, over the years that you've been sober, do you have favorite books or teachers that you want to share that have helped you in your journey?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have tons of mentors in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? What you call AA heroes, and a lot of people that I have just kind of, modeled my life after. But yeah, no one's ever asked me that question. But here's the thing. I'm not a good reader, if you will, but I'm constantly like listening to things, listening to podcasts, listening to audio books, listening to, reading through websites and such. Excuse me. Recently I've been listening to, I like to listen to a guy named Rob Bell. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's a preacher. He's not a preacher.
Bell.
Yeah, Rob Bell. I listen to
on a podcast?
Yeah, he's a podcast. Yeah.
Okay.
He wrote a book at one point called Love Wins, and that kind of made him fairly popular. And he wrote another one called Velvet Elvis. And anyway, I love Rob Bell, and he just gives me a new perspective. And all of his work is like, he doesn't actually work in a church, but it's all spiritual work. I don't know. You just have to listen to him.
I will. That sounds amazing.
I'm probably butchering his message, but
hey, well, you know what? The message of love wins. I mean, that's pretty clear, right?
That is.
I love it.
So,
that's awesome. What kind?
And I remember reading M. Scott Peck. I remember reading M. Scott Peck when I first got. Yeah, I really love that one. That was a good book. I read. In fact, I'm looking at them on my shelf here now. I read Pass It On. I read obviously the big book, The Language of the Heart. And so, I'm sorry. Yeah. And so I have, just a lot of AA literature. I like the AA Comes of Age. I love all of that. But, and recently I've been really into a lot of different, podcasts, not only podcasts about podcasting, but podcasts about sobriety, such as yourself in recovery, the ODAT chat, give it another plug there.
Yay!
It's fantastic.
No, that's fun. There are so many. And listen, let's talk a little bit about podcasting, about recovery for just a minute, because, you and I are very similar in a lot of ways. We've both been married to the same person for a long time. And, my husband's been sober 30 years. You've been sober 30 years. And I know your wife has been sober the same amount of time as me. So we have a lot of similarities.
24 years.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. I get it. I was feeling like I was a little bit indoctrinated into, 12 steps and in the rooms. And when I started podcasting, I started meeting all kinds of people who find sobriety through a variety of different modalities. There's EMDR therapy, and there's Celebrate Recovery, and just there's so many. I interviewed a lady who got sober. She started listening to podcasts, and that helped her to get over her prejudice about 12-step groups, and she ended up in 12-step groups. And although she doesn't believe everything, it is sort of a take what you like and leave the rest situation. So what has your experience been as you do your podcast and listen to how other people get sober?
Yeah, that's it's been, first of all, for me, podcasting has put a little juice into my recovery program, if you will. In other words, I've been going to meetings. I still go to 5 to 6 meetings a week, usually 6 meetings a week. And, in the beginning I was going to probably 15, 20 meetings a week. I would get there really just as often as I could. Right. So
do people ask you, why do you still go to so many meetings?
Yeah, they do. I
go to a lot too, but I love them.
You're right. It's hard for me to explain, but there's just a feeling of a feeling of calm, and it just brings me back to earth when I'm able to go to meetings. Now I know people who have said. I knew this one guy in our group. Right, he said that he had never been to a meeting for himself. He goes for other people. And I'm hoping someday I get that evolved. But I go for myself, and then when I'm there, I think, I should help other people. Yeah. So yeah, I still do go to a lot of meetings. Oh, in terms of podcasting, what you're asking about, it gave me some juice for my program, because, you hear the same things from the same people, including myself, on a consistent basis. And so it helped me to see things from a different perspective and get to listen to other people. And it's actually helped me to solidify. I see that other people get sober in different ways, and I'm very respectful of that. Yeah. But it has helped me to solidify that, I know what works for me. I like the 12 steps. I like Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm kind of a traditionalist, if you will. And I don't want to close the door or anything, but I imagine I will stay that way for the rest of my days.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's like, why, it's like, if it's working, if it's not broke, why fix it?
That's right. Yeah. And and through the podcast, the people that I have had, like I mentioned this on the beginning of our episode today, and that is, I have grown closer to them. I've known, there have been people that I've known for years. I had no idea about some facts in their lives. And, I bring them over. Some people I'm able to bring over for me, Arlena, kind of to do eyeball to eyeball. We just do it in my quote studio, which is my guest bedroom. And so I'm able to bring them over, and I've grown closer to them. And it's just really kind of broadened my horizons, like you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, this morning I go to a 6 a.m. meeting. It's actually called the ODAT. And that's how I named my podcast, not surprisingly. But they were talking about the gifts of the program. And, as somebody came back to the meeting today who had gone out and come back a few times, and I'm just so, humbled by the courage that it takes to be able to come back. And we welcome them with open arms. There's no judgment. We're just here to love and support. And, if you need us, we're here. If you feel like you need to move on, that's fine. But when someone comes back, it's because they know they're going to be loved by us. And that is very humbling. It makes me feel like, we're going to be there for you when you need us. And that, I don't know, that gives me purpose and hope that, people, when they're ready to change, that will be there.
Yeah, that's right. We don't shoot our wounded, so to speak. And
right.
And I was one of those who was in and out for 3 years. The last Desire chip that I got, I mean, I didn't even keep them. I had probably 10 to 12 down here in the Texas area. We call them Desire chips. Some places call them white chips and different things like that. But
what is a Desire chip?
a Desire chip is just the chip that you pick up like on your first day at a meeting or coming back from a slip that just says, I have a desire to quit drinking.
Oh, interesting. We don't have that here.
Yeah. Maybe
we do have we have 24-hour chips.
Yeah. And it's basically the same thing as a 24-hour chip.
Got it. Okay. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. So I had like at least a dozen of those, and I came home drunk one night and I thought, this crap doesn't work or doesn't work for me. It wasn't any sort of disdain or resentment for Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a disdain or resentment for myself. And I did not think that I was going to be able to get sober. Like I said, it was for other people. It was not for me.
Right.
And I threw them all away in the trash. And in fact, when I came in this last time, May 29th, 1989, I didn't even keep up with my sobriety date. I had to go back and look at credit card receipts to figure out
your last drink. Were you a bar drinker, I guess?
Yeah, it was I did both, but this particular night I was, most of the time I actually drank at home, but this night I went back out. I was with friends, and every time that what went through my head when I would go back out, Arlena, was I would say to myself, just one more night of fun and I will start over tomorrow. And I truly meant that from the bottom of my heart, but it was never that clean. Sometimes it'd be a few months before I entered back in. Sometimes it'd be a year. Sometimes it'd be a week. And I was just even more beat up than I was when I left.
Isn't it funny, the things that we tell ourselves? Your words are kind of haunting. Just one more night of quote unquote fun. If it was so damn fun, why would we need alcohol to want to quit?
Yeah,
it's really not that fun.
No, and for me, it was like, I just want to enjoy this party, or she sure is pretty and she wants to go out, and it just we were reading. In fact, I was at a meeting at noon today, and the topic of the guy who wanted to put whiskey in his milk came up.
Oh yeah, sure.
All of a sudden, whiskey and a milk sounded like a good idea. In fact, that on a full stomach should be okay.
Yeah.
And then after he had that first, and then after he had that one shot, he goes, "Well, that worked out just fine. Why not have another?" And then you're off to the races. And
it's the disease of more. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. So very good. Well, listen. I usually wrap up the podcast with the question, since it's called ODAT, which stands for One Day at a Time, do you have a daily process, a ritual or routine that you go through to help you to stay sober one day at a time? Or
Yeah, I sure do. Well, I in the morning I get up, and so I have a couple of little one's an AA and one is for the religion I practice, Christianity. I have a little a thing called Upper Room, and then I read through, and I have a couple of different AA books, and I read through that, and I just kind of take some time to breathe and meditate. I've gotten into a little bit more the breathing. My yoga has really helped with that, and I do meditation at night. But nonetheless, so I do a little breathing exercise to try to center me. Then I get on with my day, and usually go to a meeting at noon when I'm not traveling for business. And then at night, I make sure that I do a daily inventory. I just do it in my head. I know a lot of people actually do it in writing, and this is, I also do meditation when I do my when I do yoga. And in other words, I call it active meditation. I'm
Sure.
sitting there and I just say, I love you, God. I love you, God. I love you, God,
Oh,
over and over and over and over. And that kind of gets me in connection with him. And then when I go to bed at night, this is something really I've just started over the past year to year and a half now. In fact, somebody who is not an alcoholic, who got sober through meditation only, who appeared on one of my episodes, his name is Gavin.
mhm.
I started, I got a hold of an Insight Timer, which a lot of people know
Sure.
of nowadays, the
Love it.
meditation app. And I usually do that 30 to 45 minutes at night to kind of nod me off. And I do
Mhm.
meditation during that time. And, I'm just constantly involved with my, the podcast. And, there's a lot of guys that they call me sponsor. I'm not sure how much I do for them or don't do for them, but
Yeah.
I'm fortunate that there are a lot of guys who call me that, and I have my sponsor. So
Yeah.
it's nothing outside of the ordinary, but it's the consistency. One good thing that I told you my mom was obsessive compulsive, as you know. Well, I
Oh,
picked up that I picked up a lesser version of that, a functional version of that.
It sounds like healthier. Listen, I would love to be obsessive compulsive about recovery.
Right. Well,
Seems like that's
that's right. I'm into
the
my
only thing I do in
routine.
moderation.
I am definitely into my routine, and I like
I
to do the
love
same
that.
thing on a consistent basis, and it has helped me in recovery. I am the only guy, my sponsor tells me this today, the only guy that he ever said to put down the big book. Quit reading it. I'm tired of talking about this with you. You just need
Go
to get a
live life
life.
already. Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's really good. You know what? They say that we learn to turn our defects into assets. So
Yeah,
you
that's
have
right.
definitely done that. And listen, thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad that we were able to connect and that you were able to share your story. I can't wait to share it with my listeners. And, I just want to encourage them to listen to your podcast as well, soberspeak.com. I'm guessing that's on iTunes. They can find that on iTunes.
They can, any podcast player that they want to.
Awesome. Great. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed our chat today, and I'll look forward to speaking with you again soon.
God bless you, Arlena. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Clear.
Okay. So let's go ahead. Now, my end, it says you're still recording, but I don't care. So I want
It
to
is.
go
I'm
ahead.
just going to edit it out, but that's fine.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so
I have to ask you. So you're in enterprise technology sales?
I am, yes.
I am too. Who do you work for?
I work for, oh, wow, I just banged my mic. I'm glad I didn't do that. By the way, I'm not sick or anything, but for whatever reason, talking that my throat was
Yeah.
caught in it during the,
Yeah.
during the episode. But anyway, I work for a company called Conduent. We sell, loan servicing software to enterprise corporations such as, like Capital One Auto and people
Oh,
like that.
nice. Okay. Yeah. I
What kind
work
of
for
software do
Adobe.
you use?
I work for Adobe. I sell their
Oh,
it's a DocuSign competitive product, and it's
yeah,
called Adobe Sign.
oh, really? I
Yeah.
had not heard of that. And
Yeah,
so you're in Northern California, right?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's where
So
is that where they're
I'm
based
so
out of? Is that where?
yeah, Adobe's headquarters is downtown San Jose where I am.
Very cool. Oh, San Jose. Okay.
Yeah, I'm in
Do
San
you know the
Jose.
way to
So
San
but yeah, so I started podcasting doing a sales podcast. Actually,
Jose? Really?
if you look up Arlena Allen, you'll see sales polish, which
Okay,
is
sales
my
polish.
yeah,
Is that what it's called? Sales polish? Okay. Yeah.
polish. I was thinking like, oh, polish your sales skills. I was painting my nails one day. I was thinking about what should I name my podcast? Oh, I know, sales polish. It was silly. I didn't really think it through, but there you have it. That was my first one.
Do you still do that podcast?
I'm not producing any more episodes, but it's still up on iTunes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go
It's
find
been
it for sure.
yeah, it's been good for, so in Silicon Valley, we change jobs a lot out here, or at least I do anyway.
Yeah.
It's always been a good interview tool to be like, hey, I love sales so much. I have a podcast about sales.
That's right. Are you on
Always
LinkedIn as well?
I am, yeah.
Okay, I'll find you there. Yeah, I
Yeah.
do LinkedIn. I'm not real. I don't know Instagram, or actually, I'm getting used to it. I'm not. I just got a Facebook account for this podcast, like like
Hmm.
a year ago, and the Instagram I'm kind of getting going on, and I have Twitter, but I'm not real proficient in them.
Well, I
But
tell you what, Twitter I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter anymore. It's been good to have it. And, if I'm recruiting people, authors or whatever, it's been kind of good to have that. But I don't find that it grows my audience. So
which one does, like in Instagram or Facebook?
um, I feel like, so what grows my audience is interviewing people who have an audience.
Right. Right.
And yeah, you know what I mean? So like, as you and I trade interviews,
Right.
I'll get exposure from your audience, and you can get
Vice
exposure from
versa.
my audience, and
Right.
you'll gain some followers. So that seems to be the best way.
I noticed you were on with Omar. How'd that go?
I love Omar.
Okay, good.
Yeah, he's a really good dude, super friendly. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to do your podcast. He might have to kind of, be persistent, but
Okay.
because he's super busy, but he's a really good dude.
Okay, good. He's like down in Costa Rica or something like that.
I forget where he is now. Maybe he's in Costa. For some reason, I felt like he moved, but I'm not sure if he'd moved to Costa Rica or from Costa Rica. Now he's somewhere else. I don't remember.
Okay.
But super nice guy. He has a big following.
Right.
Same mission though, really, is
Right.
to help people recover from addiction. So
Yeah. Well, cool. All right, so let's talk about
okay.
Let me get my computer over this other computer.
Sure.
So I can usually I record on Saturdays at 2 p.m. Central, which is 12 your time. Does that
okay.
work by any chance for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, January, I think I have been getting ahead, and I quit kind of doing much in December, and so I think I'm open in January. If you want to pick one, hold on just a second here. So I have something on this Saturday, right? Let me look here.
Yeah, I could do.
Yeah. Yeah, you pick one.
Oh, wait a minute. What am I looking at? That's December. Okay, I could do the 12th at noon.
The 12th?
My time.
Okay, so I got 12 at Saturday. Jake's birthday. Hold on just a second. My son, hold on. I don't know if that's, no, that is his birthday, but that's not the day we're going to the. Can you hold on just a second? I need to ask my wife.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm on with somebody. I'm just finishing up. We're trying to sit with them. Thank you. Okay, we're good. Party starts at 5 o'clock my time. So.
Oh, okay.
So Arlena.
So the 12th at noon.
Arlena A. Sober Speed, right? And I usually don't send out you're very organized about it. I haven't figured out the scheduling thing yet. So do you have that on your calendar?
I'm putting it on my calendar right now.
Okay, so So probably like 15 minutes before, I'll just send out a, link that says join now or whatever the case may be.
Sure. Yeah.
So Arlena A, Silver Speak, 2 to 3 p.m. on or Central on Saturday, January 12th, Jake's birthday.
Yep. I got it.
Okay. That sounds great. Well, I'm glad we got to meet.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and I have about 3 or 4 ahead of yours that I'm going to publish. So you'll probably see this at the end of January or early February.
Yeah, you're good about that. See, I'm good too. I've got I usually have like 3 in the can, and right now I've got 2 in the can. And so you're good at, there's some people I know, they're like doing it at the last second and trying to get it all edited and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've done that too. It makes me crazy.
Right.
Excellent.
All right, Miss Arlena.
Thank you so much for your time, and I'll look forward to speaking with you on the 12th.
Blessings to you and your work. You take care. I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye. One last thing before you go, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. And if you'd like to make a donation to the podcast and help me keep the lights on, you can do so by visiting odatchat.com. There's a donation button or membership button on the right-hand side. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.